Holes chapter 32. 2 days later, a new kid was assigned to Group D. His name was Brian, but Extra called him Twitch because he was always fidgeting. Twitch was assigned Zero's bed and Zero's crate. Vacancies don't last long at Camp Green Lake. Twitch had been arrested for stealing a car. He claimed he could break into a car, disconnect the alarm, and hotwire the engine all in less than a minute. I never planned to, steal one, he told them, but sometimes, I'll be walking past a real nice car parked in a deserted area and, I'll just start twitching. If you think I twitch now, you should see me in front when I'm around a car. Next thing I know, I'm behind the wheel. Stanley lay on his scratchy sheets. It occurred to him that his cot was no longer smelled bad. He wondered if the smell had gone away, or if he had just gotten used to it. "Hey, caveman," said Twitch, "do we really have to get up at 4:30? "You get used to it," Stanley told him. "It's the coolest part of the day." He tried not to think about Zero. It was too late. Either he'd made it to Big Thumb or... What worried him the most, however, wasn't that it was too late. What worried him the most was really at his insides was the fear that it wasn't too late. What if Zero was still alive, desperately crawling across the dirt, searching for water? He tried to force the image out of his mind. The next morning, out on the lake, Stanley listened as Mr. Sir told Twitch the requirements for his hole. As wide and as deep as your shovel. Twitch fidgeted. His finger drummed against the wooden shaft of the shovel, and his neck moved from side to side. "You won't be twitching so much after digging all day," Mr. Sir told him. "You won't have the strength to wiggle your pinky." He popped some sunflower seeds into his mouth, deftly chewed them, and spat out the shells. "This ain't Girl Scouts camp." The water truck came shortly after sunrise. Stanley got in line behind Magnet, ahead of Twitch. What if it wasn't too late? He watched Mr. Sir fill X-Ray's canteen. The image of Zero crawling across the hot, dry dirt remained in his head. But what could he do about it? Even if Zero was somehow alive after more than 4 days, how would Stanley ever find him? It would take days. He would need a car or a pickup truck. A pickup truck with a tank of water in the back. Stanley wondered if Mr. Sir had left the keys in the ignition. He slowly backed away from the line, then circled over to the side of the truck. He looked through the window. The keys were still there, dangling in the ignition. Stanley felt his fingers start to twitch. He took a deep breath and steadied himself and tried to think clearly. He had never driven before, but how hard could it be? This is really crazy, he told himself. Whatever he did, he knew he had to do it quickly before Mr. Sir noticed. It's too late, he told himself. Zero couldn't have survived. But what if it wasn't too late? He took another deep breath. Think about this, he told himself. But there wasn't time to think. He flung the door open to the truck and climbed inside. "Hey!" shouted Mr. Sir. He turned the key and stepped on the gas pedal. The engine revved. The truck didn't move. He pressed the pedal to the floor. The engine roared, but the truck was motionless. Mr. Sir came running on around the side of the truck. The door was still open. "Put it in gear!" shouted Twitch. The gear shift was on the floor next to the seat. Stanley pulled the lever back until the arrow pointed to the letter D for drive. The truck lurched forward. Stanley jerked back against the seat and tightly gripped the wheel as the truck accelerated. His foot was pressed to the floor. The truck went faster and faster across the dry lake bed. It bounced over a pile of dirt. Suddenly, Stanley was slammed forward, then instantly backward as the airbag exploded in his face. He fell out of the open door and onto the ground. He had driven into a hole. He lay on the dirt, staring at the truck, which stuck lopsided into the ground. He sighed. He couldn't blame his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather this time. This time, it was his own fault, 100%. He had probably just done the stupidest thing he had ever done in his short and miserable life. He managed to get onto his feet. He was sore, but he didn't think he had any broken bones. He glanced back at Mr. Sir, who remained where he was, staring at Stanley. He ran. His canteen was strapped around his neck. It banged against his chest as he ran, and every time it hit him against him, it reminded him that it was empty, empty, empty. Chapter 33. He slowed to a walk. As far as he could tell, nobody was chasing him. He could hear voices from by the truck, but he couldn't make out the words. Occasionally he'd hear the revving of the engine, but the truck wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. He headed in what he thought was the direction of Big Thumb. He couldn't see through the haze. Walking helped him calm down and allowed him to think clearly. He doubted he could make it to Big Thumb, and with no water in his canteen, he didn't want to risk his life on the hope that he'd find refuge there. He'd have to return to camp. He knew that. But he was in no hurry. It would be better to return later after everyone had the chance to calm down. And as long as he'd come this far, he might as well look for Zero. He decided he would walk as long as he could until he was too weak to go any further. Then he'd turn around and go back. He smiled as he realized that wouldn't quite work. He would only go halfway as far as he thought could go, so that he'd still have the strength to return. Then he'd have to make a deal with the warden, tell her where he found Kate Barlow's lipstick tube, and beg for mercy. He was surprised by how far out the holes extended. He couldn't even see the campground anymore, but he still kept passing holes. Just when he thought he passed the last hole, he come across another cluster of them, a little farther away. Back at the compound, they had dug in a systematic order, row upon row, allowing space for the water truck. But out here, there was no system. It was as if every once in a while, in a fit of frustration, the warden would just pick a spot at random and say, "What the heck? Dig here." It was like trying to guess the winning numbers in a lottery. Stanley found himself looking down at each hole as he passed. He didn't admit to himself what he was looking for. After more than an hour had gone by, he thought he'd surely seen the last hole, but then, off to the left, he saw another cluster of them. He didn't actually see the holes, he saw mounds of dirt that surrounded them. He stepped over the mounds and looked into the first hole. His heart stopped. Down at the bottom was a family of yellow, spotted lizards. Their large red eyes looked up at them. He leapt back over the mound and ran. He didn't know if they were chasing after him. He thought he might have seen one leap out of the hole. He ran until he couldn't run any farther, then collapsed. They hadn't come after him. He sat there a while and caught his breath. As he got back to his feet, he thought he noticed something on the ground, maybe 50 yards away. It didn't look like much, maybe just a big rock. But in a land of nothingness, any little thing seemed unusual. He walked slowly toward it. The encounter with the lizards had made him very cautious. It turned out to be an empty sack of sunflower seeds. He wondered if it was the same one Magnet had stolen from Mr. Sir, although that didn't seem likely. He turned it inside out and found one seed stuck to the burlap. Lunch.